Hello and welcome to The Measure, the show where we learn all about distilled spirits from those who make them. On this show, we're going to be talking to Alex, who is one of the founding members of Stauning Distillery in Denmark, and he'll be telling us all about how they started up their distilling project and how it became a successful commercial distillery today. Denmark's whisky industry is relatively modern. It all started in 2003 with a changing of the tax regulations that finally made it financially viable to make whisky. So Alex, it's lovely to have you with us. Please tell us a little bit about how you started out.
Nice to meet you too. Well, yes, of course I can. I'm one of the 9 founders of Stauning Whisky. We're 9 friends. We started up in 2005 as a kind of a project, a hobby, to see if it was possible to make whiskey in Denmark. It was my now good friend Martin Vesterby that came up with the original idea, and his 2 brothers, Lasse and Jesper. Could it be done? 2005? Well, why not? Whiskey is basically being produced all over the world, so why not Denmark? But in 2005, New World Whiskey was kind of new. I don't think even we had the term New World Whiskey in 2005. So we were looking to some areas like Japan, Scotland, Ireland, US to see what kind of whiskey would we like to do. And in 2005, we decided to try to make a kind of a copy of a Scotch single malt. We really liked Ardbeg from the 70s, so we decided to try to make a Ardbeg.
So if your starting point was the inspiration of 1970s Ardbeg, you knew what you wanted it to taste like, but without any experience in distilling. How did you know where to start to achieve that?
So the 9 founders of us, we didn't know anything about whiskey. So to learn about whiskey, we Googled whiskey and found out, how to actually make a kind of a classic Scotch whiskey. And when you look at Ardbeg, one of the key things is you need peat to make a single malt whiskey. And if you don't know anything about whiskey, then the best is actually to try to do everything from scratch. So we decided to do grow the grain, do floor malting, open fired stills, old school fermentation, open tanks, a wort with a lot of solids as you would have like 100 years ago. So kind of creating the original type of Scotch whiskey from basically 200 years ago was the idea of the 9 founders of Stauning Whisky. And we didn't know, how would this taste, introducing peat, the type of grain. We didn't have any ideas. We hadn't tasted new make before. So basically just really basic stuff starting up on doing. And success, well, the first new make we tasted was interesting, let's put it like that. But it was certainly peated. A lot of smoke came into that alcohol, a lot of fruity notes, apple, pear, citrus, and then the kind of that dry Highland, I would say almost in Denmark, Highland smoke, not Islay smoke, but when you taste the old Ardbegs, they're not as kind of Islay smoky as today, interesting enough.
So you just Googled whiskey making and got on with it. I love that. Now, if you're aiming for this maritime, smoky style of single malt, in Denmark, you don't really have a history or a tradition of making whiskey that way or any tradition at all. So how did you approach trying to recreate an Islay style of whiskey?
No, so when we found out we had to do a peated version of a whiskey, we again Googled what is peat. And I think we have to remember that a lot of young people today, they don't have the slightest clue on what peat is, and neither did we. So looking into what is peat, we found out there are several peat bogs in Denmark. Well, all over the world they have peat bogs. So we contacted a few of the producers that uses the spugnum, kind of the peat for plants. I talked to one of the oldest guys in that company, and he told me that there's a museum near Stauning that digs up peat to show the history of peat. So it's a peat museum. So I contacted the managing director of the peat museum, and he gave a guided tour on 1.5 hours and gave me a bag of peat back home. Then we put it on the barbecue and found out, well, the smoke of this is just amazing. And so then we had to start up, malting, using the peat to create that smoky flavor, get it into a grid. So it was back to basics again, doing everything from scratch. And that was really fun to discover, the effect of peat and how it was used, several hundred years ago.
So you sourced your local barley, you sourced your peat. I guess the final piece of the puzzle is your distillation equipment. And there are so many choices that you can make when you're deciding what to buy, whether it's direct fire, the type of condenser. What did you guys decide to go for in the end?
Again, going back to how they did it in the beginning of making whiskey, we knew we needed to we needed to have fire. We actually asked Forsyth if they could make us some stills, but we very quickly found out it is extremely expensive to go to one of these producers of stills and get that total system. And remember, this was only a hobby in the beginning, so we had to find out a way to get some low priced stills. So we contacted several producers of stills and got what we call alembic stills, so kind of Arabic shaped stills, very small. You still use them in the south part of Europe for making brandy and liquids like that. And the essence of that is they extract the flavor of the fruit. They're very good at extracting the flavors of the fruit they use for brandy or snaps or whatever they want to use it for. So we had a couple of small pot stills sent up from Portugal and started using them with open fire, paella burners under the stills, sitting in the abattoir or butchery. A hot summer day in August, you can imagine that situation. The night of us sitting, sweating in that small abattoir. It was 25 degrees outside and 50 degrees inside, having whiskeys and having fun and just enjoying life and making whiskey.
The act of distillation is sometimes described as an art form, even though it's a very technical and complex science. And the reason for that, I guess, is that as you're distilling, what's coming off the still in vapor is changing moment by moment, and the composition is always in flux. So when you're deciding which parts to cut away and which parts to keep, where you make that cut from heads to heart and hearts to tails, that's something that you can vary to alter the style of the whiskey. So how did you all at Stauning decide where you were going to put those cuts?
Well, again, some of us are engineers, so there was a very thorough plan on how to do this. And we did cuts, and I can't remember, we took out liquid for every 15 minutes. So you can imagine we have a lot of bottles and bigger tanks that could hold that liquid. So afterwards, we could taste from every 15 minutes what the liquid would taste like, and then combine it afterwards and see how it worked out. So that was kind of the first test. It looks ridiculous with all these small bottles. You should see it.
I often think of Stauning in its present iteration as a large commercial distillery, as not really just one distillery, but as many, many tiny distilleries. So can you talk to us a little bit about how and why you chose to scale up in that way?
Yes, a few things has changed over the years, but you're absolutely right. It is kind of Stauning whiskey beginning times 24 when you look at it today. We still use small pot stills. We have 24 pot stills, 60 wash stills, and 8 spirit stills. They are though doubled in size now, so it's 2,000 liter stills, all of them. But quite a lot still. We still use open fire, so an open flame under each of the stills, and we had to get the paella burner producer to make much bigger paella burners to actually be able to do this today. They found that very funny that they were making burners for big pot stills. We kept the floor malting. We still do floor malting, and today we did that the first time, but as you know, it's hard labor to do floor malting. You need to turn the grain very often. I think we all know the term monkey shoulder, and we didn't want any monkey shoulders in Stauning whiskey, So we decided to do some innovation, and we've created some machines that automatically turn the grain as it goes over the floor. We also we spray water on the grain when it's on the floor, so we don't soak the grain into tanks. In the steeping process, we spray it. So it's a totally new kind of invention we've done on malting, and it works quite well now. It's both in the rye when we make rye whiskey and barley when we make single malts. Fermentation has changed a bit though. The first yeast we bought was from a Swedish producer, very basic, very simple, just getting alcohol out of it. So we've changed the recipe for the yeast later on when we scaled up the process. Really trying to focus on getting the flavors out of the liquid that we wanted. But we didn't want to change it too much again, because if we change it too much, it wouldn't be a Stauning whiskey. One of the things we've changed the most was actually in the beginning, because as I told you, we were making a copy of a Scotch. And as time went, we were like, what's the interesting in making a copy? Not very interesting, actually. When you have the craft, you've learned it, you want to create your own liquid. So now we've tried to create our own style, a Nordic, the Danish and the flavor profile, which doesn't remind of Ardbeg anymore. It's very different to Ardbeg. Still have the peat, we still do floor malting and direct fire stills and so on, but it certainly have a different profile than we had in the beginnings. And I think, after talking to a lot of Scotch producers and distillers, they like that idea of not making a copy of a Scotch. Scotch are good at making their own style of whiskey. You can try to make your own, and we do that today, and that's we're very proud of that. But it is, when you look at it, look at the pictures from the beginning and look at it today, it's just scaling up what we had, keeping that DNA, small stills, hand-produced things, craft still.
So Alex, so far what we've seen from Stauning in terms of your official releases, it's often very flavourful, centering on the flavour of the grain, but quite young whiskey. You're often using new casks. But have you got any secret stock that is maturing a little bit longer? Have you explored how that whiskey develops with longer maturation?
We have older whiskey in stock. I think our biggest problem in the beginning was actually all the whiskeys we produced were sold out before they were 4 years old. So most of our whiskeys until 3-4 years ago were between 3 and 4 years old. Then we scaled up production, and now we're actually able to put it on in the warehouse for maturation for a longer time, which is kind of cool. Well, we have some casks, so we know how it will develop over time, and we know there are some sweet spots in age with certain types of casks and certain type of liquid in-house. We make a rye whiskey, we make a single malt whiskey, we make a mix between a rye whiskey and single malt whiskey. We have heather smoked whiskies, we have seaweed smoked whiskies, we have Christmas tree smoked whiskies. We have a lot of things going on. And hemp, I think we're trying next year to smoke our grain with hemp. So there's a lot of things that we don't know yet, because we'll have to see it when it's 5, 6, 7 years old. Is the direction good? Is it bad? Is there anything worse than diving into and exploring more? There's so many opportunities. Some whisky we basically do not find interesting when they are 13, 14 years old, because they use distillery character, and they start to remind of Scotch or Japanese types of whiskies, which is cool for me. And I like Japanese and Scotch, not because if I don't like it, but currently, for instance, we're having a project for a market I can't tell you right now, but we have some almost 7 years old whiskey, and I found it a bit not interesting, a bit dull, a bit too easy to drink. So we add in some 4-year-old whiskey to give it some vibrance, some life, and some character that we find interesting. So I found it's not all about age; it's about finding that flavor profile that you find interesting.
Can we talk a little bit about the cereal that you use? I know that Stauning is really proud of its relationships with local farmers, and I wondered if you'd had the opportunity to explore this idea of terroir in the production of grain and in whiskey making.
We use two local farmers today, two school friends, to some of the founders. The grain is within 25 kilometers of the distillery, so it is very local. In the area where we live, we have very sandy soil, so the water drains off very quickly, and that gives a special character to the grain we found out. So it's 100% sure that terroir means something. We've acquired a grain from other areas in Denmark, and it tastes differently to what we have in Stauning. Just recently, I met another Danish distillery, and they grew the same grain on 4 different islands, and they mashed it the same place, same description to how to do it, distilled it the same place. They did everything similar for all 4 whiskies, but only the growing part was in 4 different islands. They're totally different, those 4 whiskies. So yeah, terroir is important. That's for sure. But by keeping it with the 2 local farmers, we can work with them. We can make them try out things we would like. We pay them a bit more money to grow the grain. If we weren't paying them that kind of money, they would probably go to another place and sell their grain or work for others. But they like us. They like playing around, and they find it interesting. One thing that is interesting is that we had to choose between organic and being sustainable. And the area where we're in, we would not be very sustainable if we were growing organic grain. So I think that's one of the hot topics of the world today, especially in the spirits business. Do we want to be organic or do we want to be sustainable? That's 2 very different things. And we had to make a choice some years ago. We wanted to do both, but we could see that it would hurt our sustainability. We actually do a lot in regards to sustainability with our distillery and how we produce and the energy setup we have. Doing the organic would be terrible. Then we could go to another region and buy the grain, but then our grain wouldn't be local anymore. And we live in the outskirts of Denmark, where there's a lot of farming where we live, and people are very dependent on the farming. And for us, it's more important to support the local area and be sustainable than being organic. So we're not organic at the moment. Maybe in the future, things will develop. It seems like that when we talk to organizations and people working with grain, that in the future, the conventional type of growing grain will be more efficient than organic, but will be as organic. Because they use robots and GPS and stuff like that to kind of control the farming. So it's interesting, and it's difficult to be a producer of alcohol when you have these 2 areas you have to focus on at the same time.
You've had the most beautiful distillery designed. It sits on the west coast of Denmark in this remote, beautiful landscape. And I wondered how it had been received by the local folk. Are they proud of their local distillery?
As I remember, it's a couple of years ago. We got a new team member from the local area, and he said to me, actually people move to this area now because of the distillery. They don't move away. They find it interesting that we have this kind of icon in the area. So I was very happy to hear that we've created something special in this area where they didn't have a lot before. I'm pretty sure they're proud of Stauning Whisky, and we're proud of them. If they weren't part of our building up Stauning Whisky, we probably wouldn't be here today. We've used a lot of people from the area, information, knowledge, history, hands helping out. Still today, we use the local area for bottling. And it's almost a fight to get a seat doing bottling today. You get a bottle of whiskey when you've done your day's work in the bottling hall. So there's plenty of people that want to help out. Drink there, stand there, drink, have coffee, sing songs, and just enjoy life.
So Stauning got going at quite a similar time as we see the new Nordic food movement gather pace. And I wondered if this celebration of local ingredients and celebrating of advancing that industry extended to looking at perhaps more traditional Danish spirits like Gammeldansk as a bitter or botanical spirits like aquavit. Alex, do you think you'll ever see Stauning explore making something that isn't whiskey?
First, no, we won't move into something else. Stauning Whisky Distillery. We've decided that we are a whiskey distillery, and we'll continue to focus on whiskey. I think more people should actually do that. That's my opinion. Focus on that one type of alcohol, and maybe your brand could be doing a lot of different types of alcohol, but pick your style. That's my personal opinion. There's somebody out there doing amazing, interesting stuff, actually changing the category of spirits or breaking out of categories. For instance, Empirical, which started in Denmark, they're now based in New York in the US. They're doing a liquid that has no name. So I think that's it's fascinating that we start looking at spirits not as Calvados or Armagnac or whiskey or rum, but just the flavor of the product. I think that's cool, very cool. I don't think that we will see a renaissance in Gammeldansk and aquavit in Denmark. Well, you never know. But and maybe these products will change over time, and again, fashion goes like this. Might come back in the 10, 15, 20, 100 years. You never know. But when I look at the industry today, the on-trade especially, there was a small pushback somehow to kind of the old liquids of the Nordics, but it didn't really catch on. Some use it a bit. But when I talk to the young generation today, they don't find the interest for it. They rather like to go to other countries, other types of spirits, try new things. It's like their world is a bit more open than the older generation is. We still have the older generation having their aquavits to the herring, Christmas or Easter. I'm also one of them. I enjoy my ice cold aquavit to my herring during Easter or Christmas, but you are pretty sure it's a tough one, for those producers in the future.
Copenhagen's got an exceptional cocktail culture, and Alex, I wondered if you ever got out and about into cocktail bars and how you enjoyed drinking Stauning yourself.
I love cocktails. Denmark is not a cocktail country. It's a beer country. There's a lot of great cocktail bars in Denmark, especially Aarhus and Copenhagen. They do brilliant work of making new innovations, also perfect old school classic cocktails. I really enjoy that a lot. I have with my wife my Friday cocktail. We've had that for 4 years now. So laptop down, 4 p.m. Friday afternoon. Then I make a cocktail for the both of us. I especially enjoy the classic cocktails. Manhattan, Boulevardier, these and different versions of those I really enjoy. I really like cask strength whiskies, and I guess that's when you can almost connect the dots. These Manhattans, Boulevardiers, very complex, full, strong, bitter, with a lot of power, classic cocktails, and how you can play around with that. And I actually think that Stauning fits very well into that universe of cocktails. Some, for instance, a Manhattan, often when you use the American rye whiskies for Manhattan, the rye really shines in the cocktail. And I know a lot of people have a hard time with that kind of spicy, strong type of whiskey in a cocktail. Stauning whiskey is, I would say, a bit more subtle, a bit more, I would say, balanced. It's not balanced, it's the wrong word. It's a bit more like a single malt, actually. Our rye whiskey is a bit more like a single malt. I enjoy drinking it neat. I know a lot of people, for the first time, they try a Stauning rye or our El Clasico, which has been finished in a vermouth cask. They say, this is the first time I actually enjoy a rye whiskey neat. So when we make a classic Manhattan, I think it balances a bit better than other kind of full-on rye whiskies or bourbon whiskies. So it gives some room to play with the other liquid you have in your cocktail, and I find that very interesting to play around with. And I know bartenders also. We also have we actually sell our new make. We have a smoked rye new make. It's a bit like mezcal in flavor. It's fruity, apple, pear, and then it has this very subtle smoke to it, which different bartenders, especially Denmark, but also outside Denmark, Little Red Door in France, they use a lot to play around and make some different type of cocktails.
I love the idea of making Manhattans with a pot distilled rye whiskey, because it's so different to what you would normally reach for if you were making a Manhattan. And there's so much oiliness and depth of flavour. Yeah, it really comes through when you make those cocktails with Stauning. Alex, thank you so much for sharing all of this story with us. We'll be back soon for another episode of The Measure, so please do like and subscribe, and we'll be seeing you soon.